Hey, possibility seekers, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very excited today, super excited because I've been waiting for this podcast for a long time. And today we're going to be speaking with Carl Harte. And Carl Harte is the co-author of the bio on Jacinda Ardern, the kind of amazing leader that everyone looks up to around the world. There is Jacinda Ardern. Thank you, Carl, for popping the book up, Leading with Empathy. So it's a book a lot of people have read, a lot of people have been excited about this. So I'm really pumped to have Carl on who penned this wonderful tome. Hey, Carl, first of all, you're coming to us from where in India exactly?
I'm in Pondicherry, which is 150 kilometers south of Chennai, Madras, the old Madras. Pondicherry is an old French colony, which became independent in 1959. But it still has some of the French flavor here. We have a lot of French citizens. We have a lot of French speakers. Not me. I don't speak a word of French, apart from bon nuit and bonsoir and a few swear words.
Very eclectic, obviously in a very eclectic area, which is interesting because we might touch on that kind of worldliness, I guess, because Jacinda was
absolutely.
Quite a good traveler. Hey, look, this is called the possibility. It's all possible in the possibility podcast, and we're all about possibility. First of all, what's the word possibility mean to you?
Well, yes. Now this is a very difficult question. When I looked at this, I thought, well, that's a very broad question for a very broad word. I thought of it as limitlessness, because possibility really is not something that you can define, because, well, what we define as possible right now is, or impossible right now, is going to be possible in some time in the future with different circumstances. And I think that that's important to realize. Possibility is something that's fluid. It's also a definition of no limits. If you say something is possible, well, you're recognizing that there are no limits. As there are no limits to the universe, there are no limits to circumstances. Now, I can think of something that's impossible right now. For instance, I could say, well, I'm not going to fly around the room. But in a different situation, under different circumstances, I can't say that anything is impossible. So I like the word possibility. It's a place of openness. It's something where you recognize with humility that you don't know. You don't know. You're open to anything that comes to you, and that's good, because as human beings, as people, we have all this conditioning, and people say, "Oh, it's not possible," and that's a big word over here. When I go to a shop and I say, "Can I get this done?" "Not possible, sir," because that's how people are conditioned. But I think if you're open with the word possibility, if you're open to the possibilities inherent in the word possibility, then I think that you can do so many different things.
I love that. That's a great response. It's a really good answer about that one. In fact, quite unique as well, Carl. To me, I like it to where possibility to me where's opportunity and optimism come together.
I think that encapsulates it beautifully. The thing is that it's the ultimate truth, really, possibility. Because we don't know we really don't know a lot of things. We think we know, but based on the science of today. But I've been looking into history, and people thought it was impossible when they were starting railways for people to go more than 30 miles per hour. And now we know that they're up to 300 or 4, and they're going for 400 miles per hour. So what people think is impossible yesterday may be possible today. Yeah. And I think that that's liberating for us as people in our lives, in our careers. And I often hear people say, "Oh, can you do this?" And I think if you answer them from the realm of possibility, you say, "Well, maybe I can do that, maybe not."
If I asked the question to Jacinda Ardern, how do you think she might answer? How would she define possibility?
Well, there's two levels to this. One is the politician. She'd circumlocute because she's a politician. But if she were in private, well, I think she's a very imaginative, idealistic, sensitive person who sees a myriad of possibilities. But at the same time, I think she's how would I say this? I think she's a bit hamstrung by circumstances, as politicians are. I mean, the difficulty that she's in, as that all politicians find themselves in, is that she's got a certain number of people with her and a certain number of people who don't like what she's doing or want to go in the opposite direction. And because she can see all these possibilities, such as raising the standard of living for children, raising benefits, raising the minimum wage, all these things, and having public housing. But on the other hand, New Zealand is a very conservative country, or fairly conservative country. Mostly they've had centre-right governments over the last 70 or 80 years. So she's got a lot of people who want to go and do their own thing, which is not what she'd want to do. They want to.
Yeah, on one hand, so what you're saying, on one hand, as the person, she's probably quite optimistic and would like to do more and actually sees possibility, but on the practical side, probably, can see why she needs to take maybe those baby steps or bring someone along on the journey with her.
I think you've nailed it there. She takes incremental steps on virtually everything she does. And I think that's partly her style, being a consensus kind of a leader. And that's her personal style. She's not a head kicker or a toe cutter or a perfume steamroller or whatever. She's a person who wants to bring everyone together and all go in one group. But in that case, she has to moderate what she does. So what you have is you have a lot of on the left, where you have a lot of people who want more progress. There's some discontent, and on the right, you have people saying, "Well, I don't think she should be doing any of this." But,
right.
But somewhere in the middle, people are saying, "Well, she's not doing any damage to either side," and there's small steps forward. And the good thing about that is, like her policy that she formulated in, I think it was 2005 for Helen Clark, which was interest-free student loans, that has endured. Whereas some of the other more radical things that she might have liked to have done wouldn't have endured past Helen Clark's government.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting. Tell me though, with Jacinda, I mean, you called the book "Leading with Empathy," which I thought was a really great title, and I think sums her up. And I, when I look at leaders, I mean, I look at leading with empathy as the way it should be. I mean, my question is, what's the alternative? And I think you and I both know there are alternatives to that.
Oh yes, yes,
and
absolutely.
You reeled off some things like that. But I guess when you were writing the book and you came up with leading with empathy, what was behind the title? Why did you decide to go with that as the kind of byline for it?
Yes, well, I mean, I find the title one of the hardest things for a book. If you like Ernest Hemingway, you just write a list and keep writing a list until one comes at you. It's a very hard thing to do, but I think that sort of says she's leading with empathy, and she's one of the leading people with empathy as a leader. So I thought it has that kind of double way of reading it, and I think that's true. There are not too many leaders in today's world who lead with very much empathy at all, if I may say so.
Why not? Why not, Carl? Why do you think that? And that's been picked up. I mean, I think people look at that, and I think the title appeals because people look at Jacinda Ardern and what she's been doing, and would say, yes, she genuinely, authentically leads with empathy. Why don't more leaders lead with empathy, Carl, in your view?
I feel it's tough, Rob. Because I mean, it's tough. It's a Herculean task to lead with empathy genuinely. It's because you sometimes have to make some difficult decisions in business and as a leader in business or in government, and they're going to hurt somebody. So if you're going to be compassionate, you're opening yourself up to all that to all those feelings, all those inconvenient feelings and inconvenient backlash from people that you're doing the wrong thing when you're trying to do the right thing. It's in these days and times when you have to make hard decisions, someone's going to get hurt. In New Zealand, for instance, at the moment, the farmers don't want to change. They don't want to change their practices. Yet, if they don't change their practices, they're going to poison the environment, because we've got, the rivers are all but dead in many rivers in New Zealand. And yet, if Jacinda goes ahead and says, well, you're going to have to cut your effluent and your runoff of nitrates and what have you into the waterways, they're going to lose money. So someone's going to get hurt, whatever you do. It's
Yeah.
just, it's an extra layer of responsibility to say, I'm going to do this with compassion.
That's a great way of looking at it, actually. I really like the way you did that. So it is an extra layer, and it's extra work, isn't it? I think Brene Brown, talks a lot about leading with empathy is actually being brave and being courageous, but it's actually more work
absolutely.
too, isn't it? It's actually more work.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't really have it in you, and in a sense, sensitive people, well, it's obvious that most sensitive people don't make it into government. Most compassionate people don't make it that far.
Then let's take up that angle then, because I'm interested to see in your research where that came from. So what made Jacinda different? What made her say, you know what, I'm going to do government and I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to bring compassion to it? What drove that? Was it something in her upbringing or her history? What did you uncover there?
Okay, well, I feel very much it emanates from Jacinda's family as much as genetics and unquantifiable factors about Jacinda that we can't really say as an individual. Her father was a small town cop, and he took a lot of responsibility for his job. And it was in Jacinda's presence because they lived outside the back of the Murupara police station. So Jacinda had a very close proximity to her father's job. And Ross was a very responsible cop in a very, very difficult town. I think this was one of those towns that people wouldn't want to go to be a cop. It was, there were gang wars between rival motorcycle gangs. There were huge layoffs at the time. When Jacinda was about 5, there was Rogernomics, which decimated the countryside, and Murupara was one of the worst places hit. So they lost all these, the local employment took a dive. Everyone was on unemployment benefits and suffering. So this was a hotbed for crime. And who was the guy who was on the receiving end of it? It would have been Ross Ardern, Jacinda's father. So she saw a lot of things as a young girl that would have troubled her, but also saw how her father handled things. He's not a confrontational man. He manages to talk his way through things. Actually, he's now a career diplomat. And I think that Jacinda is also a diplomat. Actually, she's the best ambassador the country has at the moment. There's no question about that. So I think that comes from her father as a role model. Her mother's a very compassionate person, socially aware and slightly left-leaning. The family is somewhat left-leaning. So they see things more in terms of democratic socialism rather than the old Rogernomics or the centre-right user pays kind of thing that some New Zealanders might.
Yeah, great insight. I think that the upbringing was certainly something I didn't know about, and I think that would give her a really interesting perspective on some of the darker things she's had to deal with, in more recent times. But let's step ahead a little bit, because with Jacinda, she also travelled widely and worked widely as well, and globally.
Yes.
You and I are talking when we're in the middle of a pandemic, something you and I wish we both could do. But she, as I understand it, she worked and travelled in Korea and New York and London, and I know you've travelled widely as well. But what sort of perspective do you think that gave her before she came back to New Zealand?
I think it broadens your perspective. I mean, Jacinda also became the International Union of Socialist Youth president, which meant she had to go to all these camps and refugee camps and whatever. So that gave her a very broad view of things. And that was just as she was getting into politics in 2008. So I think that gave her a very, it gave her a view of humanity at its best and at its worst. Because if you see these refugee camps, I mean, I've seen some of the photographs of her going to the refugee camps. And yeah, I mean, a refugee camp is a place of very little hope and a lot of human suffering. Mm. So she's seen that, which for a New Zealander, I mean, New Zealand couldn't be further away in some respects. Australia and New Zealand are so far away from this. I mean, at least where I am here, there are people living in terrible circumstances and in other parts of the world. But Australia and New Zealand, mostly people, well, it's the suffering is individualized. There is suffering, particularly in New Zealand, due to poverty, but it's something that can be managed. Whereas when you have it on a large scale, such as in the Middle East or some of these places in where you now have these Rohingya refugees and whatever, it's horrendous. Syria. So Jacinda saw some of those kinds of places. She even came to Mumbai and saw the slums in Mumbai. I think that, though, the main thing is if you go to any country and spend any time in any other country, and the OE, the overseas experience, is a rite of passage for most New Zealanders, you understand very quickly that there's a completely different way of doing things. You can get in a plane and 12 hours later you're in a different universe. I think most of us have had that experience. We get out of the plane and we say, they don't do things the same way I do them. They don't think the same way. They have a different perspective, and things that I think are okay, they don't think are okay at all. They're wrong, and vice versa. And sometimes you look at things and say, these people might have a better way of doing things than I have. And as I have here, I sometimes see things that are done in India much better than they are in Australia or New Zealand. And sometimes I say, I want to hang on to my own ways,
right.
the things that I've brought up with. So I assume I'd imagine that has given Jacinda that very broad perspective on humanity in a short time, because she also went to South America to study, I think she was in Buenos Aires, to study Spanish with her sister. She traveled around a fair bit while she was in London. But I think probably seeing the refugee camps would have really been a sobering experience. And then when you come back to New Zealand or you see Australia, and some of the suffering that you see there seems so much more fixable and doable than what you see in.
So perspective is a wonderful thing, isn't it? It's a leveler, isn't it? I also think, and I'd like to pose it to you, but I'd imagine she also gained some really good communication skills, because she was communicating at an international level at a fairly young age, a lot earlier than most of us, given those roles she had.
Yeah, she was in her late 20s when she was doing this. But, this is something about, some things are some people have an innate talent. One of her innate talents is speaking, talking. And you see it in interviews. She can just get in and rattle off whatever. She can speak extemporaneously on virtually anything, and honestly and competently, and she's just good at it. Now, I suppose many politicians are in that are in the same boat. That's why they're in public life. They can speak well. She's a little different in that she could always speak well. But then, if you have to speak in front of large groups, such as there's one video of her speaking in front of a huge crowd of the IUSY, the International Socialist Youth Union of Socialist Youth. Yes, this is really good training for politics. But she'd always been a bit of a talker, even in public. Debating was her thing. She says she tried to make debating into a sport, like rugby.
Yeah.
And that's really good for a politician, because then you go straight into when you go straight into Parliament at a young age, you're used to the cut and thrust of debate and public life, and it's pretty brutal in there. As debating is a little bit brutal, but I think Parliament is terribly brutal, because it's like debating with no rules,
and protected rules, aren't there? It's a really interesting area, and she's been able to carry that off. I think carry that off kind of really well, as you said. She's also competent and comfortable with speaking. Whenever she speaks, whether she's doing a COVID-19 update or a much larger thing, she's able to flex, I think, for the audience. But I've noticed to do that flex really well for the audience and the occasion.
She does that fantastically. The other thing that she does well, she's been criticised a little in New Zealand for saying, "Oh, you're not a great orator." I don't agree with that. I think her style is to speak as if she's speaking to someone directly, and I think that generally carries through all her speech. It's as if she's speaking to one or two or three people. So when you turn on the TV and she's speaking, it's as if she's speaking to a room. It doesn't
Right.
feel that she's speaking to, 100,000 people. Whereas if you look at, Donald Trump is always on the other end. He's on the other far extreme. You always feel that Donald Trump is speaking to a million people. That's his style.
Or another planet.
Yes, yeah, well, that too.
Do you think,
Yeah,
would you
absolutely.
describe Jacinda as an introvert or extrovert?
That's an interesting question, because on the face of it, she's an extrovert on the face of it. But I think she has an introverted life. She likes reading. She likes sitting and relaxing on her own. I think she's got an introverted side to her, but she seems like an extrovert. I mean, it'd be interesting. That's a really interesting question, because these things can be very, they can be very misleading in terms of appearances. On one hand, a person can seem extremely outgoing, yet if you talk to them privately, they're quite different. But I think she likes people. So on that basis, I'd say she's more extroverted. She really does like being around people. Now, I mean, some politicians don't seem to like people so much. They like administration, they like the power, and they like being behind the desk and giving orders, but they don't like dealing with people very much. She's the opposite. She's like a TV star who really enjoys getting out there and pressing the flesh and talking to babies and meeting people and sending cards to people, greeting cards, or whatever. She really enjoys people. And I think that that's genuine. This is not something that she's developed. I think it's something that's just there, like her smile.
Yes,
that's natural. I mean, at first, when I was doing this book and I was talking to people, they're saying, "Oh, she's always smiling," and I said, "Well, I've looked at photographs of when she was a baby, and I've got some rare photographs of her as a teenager, and it's always the same. This big toothy grin. It's from about 6 months old to now.
It's very genuine, isn't it? You're right. I've seen some of the photographs, and you're exactly right. It's and it's very authentic. And I think it's an authentic smile, as opposed to someone who's been media trained, a politician who's been media trained on how to smile, and when they have to, damn it, meet people, as opposed to Jacinda, who clearly likes to meet people and clearly likes to be a man amongst the people. I mean, one of the things I read in the book that I had never believed, but she's quite an accomplished DJ. I didn't know that she's quite good at spinning the turntables. Was that a surprise to you?
She is, and well, at first it was when I read about it. Her I hate to call him a boyfriend, because he's not exactly a boyfriend. Her partner, Clark Gayford, she calls him a DJ. He's a genuine DJ. She calls herself a tune selector. She was a tune selector, which I think is a bit unkind to her. But that sort of goes along with her desire to keep people happy. Now, that is a wonderful thing for a politician, and a curse. Yes. She really wants people to be happy and well, and everything to be going nicely. It works when it shows in her compassion. It shows with her ability to bring people together in the face of disaster, and to deal with their needs, and to look after them and bring people to a place of common understanding when there's a crisis. But I suppose it's also rather difficult otherwise. But this came from her early childhood. She says that her first thing was to become a clown. She wanted to become a clown when she was young, because she saw a clown come to her school and do all these balloon animals. She still likes balloon animals, by the way. And she said, "I want to be a clown," because the clown was making everybody happy. Yeah. Now, this is unusual for a politician, because most politicians are not so worried about whether people are happy or not these days. I think some are, but I'd say most are a bit hard bitten. They say, well, if they're going to be happy, they're going to be happy. But mostly people aren't that happy, and I'll just do the best I can and see how we go. That's the best that it gets. And other politicians are so narcissistic that they only care about how they're going, and they just make the decision that they think is best at the time, and hang the consequences.
Yeah, but she's so different. And I want to just pick up a bit out of the book. I mean, you talked about her being a tune selector, but just for the audience, you did actually perform a 45-minute DJ set at a music festival in Auckland. didn't she? There were some great tunes. You even have the playlist in the book, which is fantastic. But I think she's a trooper because you talk about her wanting to make people happy. Apparently, she got even permanent ear damage from that concert.
Yes,
Was
in
that
her
true?
left ear.
Right.
Well, yes,
Classic.
because it was called the Red Bull Thunderdome, and I'm not sure that they have any more of those concerts anymore, because I don't know how many thousand watts they use, but if you know that in a round silo with concrete, I mean that the acoustics are deadly. It just reverberates like hell. So no doubt it was just like, it's a sound shell, and you're stuck in this sound shell. It's like having your head stuck in a big bell.
Yes.
And I don't think that they use it for this anymore. I haven't. Right. I could be wrong, but I haven't seen any more Red Bull Thunderdomes since that time.
you got to know it's going to be tough. You know it's going to be brutal on your ears at the Red Bull Thunderdome. Hey, the other thing I noticed, I was doing some research on this, and I realised that it would appear that Jacinda was in New York as a New Zealander in the early 2000s, if I'm right, which seems to be that she actually inspired the Flight of the Conchords before they went there. So Jermaine and Brett, I think, were there 2005, 2008. So she hasn't brought that one out yet, but we might need to remind her about that. I think she actually inspired Flight of the Conchords.
A good point, and it's well and truly possible. And the interesting thing is about New Zealand is that it's like Australia. We have the tall poppy syndrome and the cultural cringe. So if you don't go overseas and you don't make it, you're not a real star. Doesn't matter how good you are, whether you've got to make it in America. Even if you're better than the Americans, you've got to make it in America.
You got to make it in America. Yeah.
You've got to make it in the UK or America. And I think that's true for music. I think it's true for many cultural things. And I think perhaps that's worked that way for the Flight of the Conchords. If they say the Americans like them, they must be good.
Yeah, for sure.
But there are a lot of good people in many fields in New Zealand and Australia. You just look at the sports. I mean, how does such a small nation as New Zealand, and Australia to the same extent or a similar extent, how do such small nations of 25 million and 5 million get so many gold medals or so many medals at the Olympics?
It's an extraordinary culture, isn't it? Extraordinary.
Yes,
both the countries, both Australia and New Zealand do so fantastically well with such a small base. But it's, there's a lot of passion and a lot of times, and just the underdog, I think, how it works sometimes in both our favours when we're doing that. Hey, you're in India. I had a question for you. What do you think Jacinda would do differently if she was Prime Minister of India?
Well, this is a really difficult question, because in India if you say the word India, to me, it's like saying the word Europe.
Great point.
People think of India before they come to India as being one country, but I see it as being many countries under the one umbrella. And to try to get a unified approach throughout all these regions with all these ethnicities, there is a unifying factor of Indianness, it's the subcontinent, which even extends to some extent to Pakistan. My friends say that when they've met Pakistanis, they say they're just like us. It's just that due to historical anomaly, they're stuck in another country. And that's a whole different story, of course. But aside from that, you've got so many different languages, so many different ethnicities, so many different ways of doing things within the one country. Now, how would Jacinda handle things? I would say in India, she would probably be very visible. She'd be talking a lot. Now that, I don't know, in India, the interesting thing is you do have a strong history of women leaders. You had Indira Gandhi. Down south here, we had a woman called Amma. I did an ad for her once. Jayalalitha, and she was the queen of South India. I mean, she ran Tamil Nadu for years and years until her death. So women leaders are respected. I mean, people say that India is a patriarchal country, and I'm not saying that's incorrect, but you do have a strong history of women leaders. We've got Mamata Banerjee up north at the moment. There was Mayawati in Uttar Pradesh. Mamata Banerjee in Bengal, West Bengal. So I think women women leaders can do a good job. They can do a good job in India. I mean, they can do a good job anywhere, but their style is a little different. Their style is a little different, of course, wherever they are, and I think that that's good. I think in
what
the
way,
West,
Carl? Can you just unpack that a little bit when you say their style is a little bit different anywhere? What do you mean by that?
I think we're getting past. I think with Jacinda and there's a whole group of other women leaders who are coming up now, such as Katrin Jakobsdottir in Iceland. They're not the old prototype woman leader like Maggie Thatcher, who said, "The lady shall not be turning," spoke like a man, acted like a man, and said, "I'm more of a man than the men." And you even saw that kind of approach taken. They had to take that approach because it was seen as a man's job. So I'm going to be more masculine. They had to take that approach. Maggie Thatcher started off with a nice high soprano voice, and she trained herself to have this very low contralto like this. And we see, well, Helen Clark, and this is noted in the book, she naturally had a nice contralto voice, but she had this stylish way about her when she was young. But as she got older, it was pantsuits, short hair. It was very much a masculine way of governing, in a sense, quiet, different to the men, but still it had that masculine element. Well, now we're at a time where they say, well, we don't need that anymore. If you want to be a woman leader, we're happy for you to be a woman and a leader, as Jacinda is. Jacinda makes no concessions to being masculine, no concessions at all. She hasn't changed herself. She hasn't tried to be less stylish or whatever. And women leaders do tend to suffer a little bit historically. Oh, look at her hair. What's she wearing? Is she wearing the right colors?
It's terrible, isn't it?
It's shocking, because how does that make any difference to their ability to do their jobs?
For sure.
And the previous prime ministers in New Zealand talked at length about how they suffered. How's their hair doing, what they're wearing, and are they lesbians or are they not, or what do they do with their husbands, or ridiculous questions that male leaders don't get asked, never got asked.
Yeah.
Male leaders are just left alone on that regard. They say they've had so many male leaders, they don't worry about what
they just tend to follow each other, don't they? We don't tend to have those concerns or questions. It's crazy. You're exactly right, and it's great to have this authenticity now, and I think it's the right for the times. But also, it takes a leader like Jacinda to say, "Hey, you know what? This is who I am, and this is where I'm going to put it out there, and you either like it or you don't." Where do you think that where's she going to go from now? She just had a great victory in 2020 in the last election. Where did you get any insight into where you think she'll take her career and how long she wants to be prime minister and play in the game of politics?
Well, this is an interesting question, because I think there are several factors, and some of them are in her control and some of them are not. New Zealand political journalists tend to think that she'll make a run for United Nations. That's the general consensus, is that when she leaves politics in New Zealand, she'll go to the United Nations and perhaps do what Helen Clark couldn't do and get into a senior position.
Right.
That's one of the things that's widely touted. That's one of the routes that and I think it'd be a valid route for her. The other thing is, some people have said, well, she could keep going on forever because she's got so much support, and I'm not so sure. I think it's rather like saying in the 1980s, Mike Tyson will be the world champion boxer forever. He seems like he's invincible at a certain point, but I think elite politics is like a sport, and I think it's like boxing rather than golf.
Yes.
I don't think it's something that you can do for 30 or 40 years at the top level, because it's just so wearing on the body and the mind and the psyche.
I like the way you called it elite politics, by the way, because I think that's actually very apt. It is very much akin to elite sport and that elite level, isn't it? There's only a certain amount of time you're at that high level and you can actually do it.
Yes. Well, I mean, part of it is people get sick of you.
Correct.
And John Key in 2016, he saw his popularity slide down to 30-something%, and he was tired. And he said openly, and I think he was telling the truth. I mean, when I first heard about it, I thought, there must have been a scandal. He must have had some dirt on him that was about to come bursting out and, ruin everything. But then I looked into it and I don't think so. I think he was telling the truth. He said, I don't have any gas left in the tank. He's just done. He's just like, I'm tired. I've had these, I mean, it's just so difficult. You've got coalition politics. You've got this happening, that happening. You've got, he had a severe earthquake during his tenure. He had a lot of ups and downs with coalition partners, such as Winston Peters.
Yeah.
So that's tiring and very wearing, and people expect a lot of a leader, even when it's not in the leader's power to do anything. I mean, I look at this political leadership as like being on a ship where the ship is already, you're already stuck in the ocean somewhere. You can't just suddenly click your fingers and say, right, I'm going somewhere different. It just doesn't work. First of all, you've got to try and reorient the ship. And that's not so easy. Things you've got a certain amount of momentum, and then you've got your crew and your passengers all telling you what to do. And so I think I think people expect a good deal of their leaders, but they're not willing to empower them to do all those things that they want them to do. And even if they did empower them, then they'd end up with a disaster, because you can only keep so many people happy at one time. Yeah. So I think that's very wearing on people. And the other thing for Jacinda is, even though she's a very comfortable speaker, I noticed that she's lost weight as a prime minister. And that is perhaps because she gets nervous before she speaks, which she said she does, and she doesn't eat enough. Now, if you have to eat, if you're having trouble eating, and you're doing 3 speeches a day, that's going to take it out of you physically.
It's pretty draining, isn't it? It's fairly draining. Oh, well, look, I'm disappointed about this United Nations aspirations of Jacinda Ardern, because I was hoping she'd have a run at Australian politics.
I think many of us have. I was hoping
we could, it's like most Australians do, we poach anything good out of New Zealand, as you know, and we're very quite keen to have a chat with Jacinda on the side and see if she'd come over here. So that's disappointing. Hey, tell me about the role. Did you enjoy doing the book?
I loved it. I found it wearing, because it is wearing. As you know, when you write, you have to do it to a deadline, and the deadline that the publisher gave me was a little bit tight. And I mean, it's not as tight. Yeah, they're a bit ambitious, but I mean, it's just that doing a good job in that time. I mean, just writing guff is okay, writing just ordinary stuff, but you want it to be good. So that's where it's difficult, I think, as you know. I mean, to just write words, to belt out 2,000 or 3,000 words in a day is possible, but you probably find 2/3 of it is rubbish. Yeah. And you want it to be really good. And I was lucky to work with we were lucky to have Bill Swainson from One World, who's extremely, extremely good and extremely experienced. And he was a great help as an editor. I mean, I've been an editor for other people. I've been an editor for many books, and it was good to have someone else guiding me, because you always feel that you think you know what's right to put in a book, and then someone comes along and says, "Have you thought of that? Do you really want to say that? Is that correct? Are you sure that shouldn't be there? I don't think." And then you look at it and you say, "Oh, I'm glad they said that. I could have got myself into trouble."
Yeah, there. I know exactly right. Look, it's nothing like a good editor is just one of the best. So the book's out. The book's out now. It's out and about in all the major places, Carl. So it's Jacinda Ardern, Leading with Empathy. I love it. It's a great book and great testament to you too. It's a good read. It's a solid read, and there's some really great insights to it. So well done on getting it out there, and I think that just gives us some insight into somebody who really has piqued the imagination of so many people. You talk about Hillary Clinton talking about Jacinda, and Oprah talking about Jacinda, but there's also just the everyday person, in Australia or New Zealand, like you or I goes, she's different. She's really interesting, and it's a great story that had to be told, I think. And she's still Prime Minister, which I think is even more exciting, because we can turn on the TV and actually see her in action. It's not like something written about someone in 1940.
Yes, and we know that we're onto something a little bit different, and there's now a prototype for a new kind of leader, if you like, or a different kind of leader,
Yes.
a person who has some other way of doing things. So we've got the strong man. We've had a lot of Trumps and Putins, and we've even got Scott Morrison, who wouldn't say he's a strong man, but we've got the standard kind of politicians. And it's interesting to see that we've got a woman who's compassionate, who can be really effective at getting things done, because she's bringing people along with her. She's not enforcing and direction giving. She's saying, we really need to do this as a nation. And we would really know what you're going through, but I appreciate your cooperation. And that brings people with you. Now, you're a leadership expert, and you know the power of that. So instead of people feeling like they're being dragged along by the ear, they say, I'm going to go willingly, and I don't want to do this, but we have to do this for the nation.
Yeah,
and
I love the way I think one thing she's turned around, Carl, to your point, is she's really shown the power of influence versus authority. And I think that's been something that's been to say, she gets things done. I think you said that before. And yes, she's compassionate, and yes, she leads with empathy, but she actually gets things done, and she does it through influence rather than banging it down, which she can do. We all know she can do that.
Oh, yes.
But she doesn't.
Yes,
that's not her first port of call.
And I think you've put that. I think you've put that in a nutshell there, Rob. I think that sort of says it all about her style. This idea of saying, this is what you've got to do, go and do it. That's very crude. If that's your only option, then that's your last option, and it's not a good one.
Yeah,
and that's the same in a company, I'd say. You know more about management by a long shot than I do, but if you're in a company and you have to say to people, this is your job, just go and do it, then you're a crude manager, and you're not going to get as good results as if you get someone and you consult with them and talk to them and find ways of bringing them along with you and being part of the process.
Yeah, and you genuinely care, and I think that's the bit that also has come out of this interview with you, Carl, was that she genuinely likes being with people, and so she genuinely wants the best for people, and that comes from that's very centered in her. It's not something she's putting on. I think that's very genuine. I think that's when, so if you're a leader and you're listening to this, which no doubt you are, that's a really important part. But just being authentic and open and caring about people, actually, caring about what they think and what they do is she's demonstrated this is very powerful.
And people don't see anything other than what she is, because there really isn't anything else there. Of course, there's going to be a private side, but what you see is pretty much what you get. This isn't publicity spin or training. She's pretty much genuinely she projects herself to be. That's what I found in the book. I didn't find any hidden sides or, one side to her that she shows occasionally is she's got a bit of a sting in her when she's in the corner and someone, gets a bit nasty with her. She can hit back. But that's normal. That's she doesn't hide.
I think we've all got that. I think at some point we're in a corner, aren't we? It's human nature, isn't it? When you put into a corner, you're going to come out. You have to defend it.
You have to, yes. And she can do that. She's really good at doing that if she's in a corner. But that's not what she works with. You have to have that in politics. Otherwise, Otherwise, they just pick on you. It's like what did Judith Collins, the leader of the opposition, say? She said that Parliament is like Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, that's right. Very much so. Very much so. Hey, Carl, thanks so much for your time today, getting us there all the way from India. I really appreciate it. That's been some great insights.
So much, Rob.
Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Great speaking with you.
Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoyed this episode of the It's All Possible podcast. Please subscribe and rate the podcast you listen to so we can continue to serve you and inspire others. Remember, connect to us on all the social media channels. The It's All Possible podcast is hosted by me, Rob Harte, and produced by the phenomena that is Finn Harte. Connect with us via LinkedIn, Instagram, or the link tree in the show notes.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.